My boyfriend's family hates me and thinks I'm ruining his life. Now I have to face them at Christmas and I'm terrified of what they'll say. I met my boyfriend online. He's from Europe and I live in America. We've been together for 2 years, well, online for most of it. He started coming here regularly earlier this year and it's been incredible. Honestly, I still can't believe he's real. He's the nicest, funniest, most amazing guy I've ever met, and sometimes I catch myself wondering, how did I get this lucky? He's also, let's be real, way out of my league when it comes to looks. And that's where things get complicated. I've struggled with my self-esteem for as long as I can remember, and my weight has always been a big part of that. I'm not 400 pounds or anything. I can walk, run if I have to, take care of myself just fine. But I'm overweight and I feel it in every part of my life. Every glance. Every assumption people make. I'm hyper-aware of it, and I go out of my way to make sure I don't fall into any of the stereotypes. I obsess over my hygiene because the thought of someone thinking I smell bad just because I'm overweight. No thanks. I only wear clothes that cover my arms and back, even when it's hot. My boyfriend is literally the only person outside of my family who's ever seen me without a sweater. I try to put effort into my appearance, because if I have to be fat, I refuse to be sloppy too. It's been like this for as long as I can remember. I grew up in a house where food was never wasted. My parents were young and struggling. Dinner wasn't just a meal, it was survival. I still remember being 5 years old, sitting at the table for hours because I wouldn't finish my plate. Don't get me wrong, my parents weren't abusive, they were just kids themselves, figuring things out. And I love them. We have a great relationship now. But growing up overweight? It sticks with you. The bullying, the stares, the whispers. It shapes you in ways you don't even realize until you're standing in front of the mirror, picking yourself apart. And now, I'm facing something that feels even scarier than my own reflection. My boyfriend wants me to meet his family. Spend Christmas and New Year's in his home country. The moment he asked, my stomach dropped. I told him I'd think about it, but the more I do, the more I feel like I'm spiraling. I want to go. I love him. I can see a future with him. If we got married someday, I'd be the happiest girl in the world. But I also really don't want to go. I'm terrified. Terrified of being on a plane where I don't know if the seats will fit me. Terrified of being in a country where people are thin, active, and bike everywhere. Terrified of being the walking, breathing stereotype of an unhealthy American. And most of all, I'm terrified his family won't like me. That they'll look at me and think he could do so much better. I don't want to embarrass him. I don't want to be the reason they see him differently. The past few days, I've been acting off, mopey, distracted. And of course, he's noticed. He keeps asking if something's wrong, and I can tell he's worried. I don't want him to think I'm not serious about him or that I don't want to meet his family. I do. But the thought of facing all of this, it's paralyzing. So what do I do? Do I go and risk feeling completely out of place, humiliated, and judged? Do I stay behind and tell him why, risking him thinking I'm not committed enough? If I could magically lose 80 pounds in the next couple of weeks, I'd do it in a heartbeat. But that's not happening, and I'm stuck with reality. I love him. I want to be with him. But right now, I just don't know what to do. Update 1. I finally sat down and told my boyfriend everything. Every single thing that has been eating me up inside, the fears, the doubts, the absolute dread of meeting his family. I didn't hold back. I told him how scared I was of getting on that plane, of not fitting in, of being judged the second they laid eyes on me. I told him about the way I constantly feel like people are staring at me when we're out together, the way I worry they're wondering what someone like him is doing with someone like me. He just sat there and listened. Not the fake, nodding along kind of listening, but the real, focused kind. He didn't interrupt, didn't try to brush it off or give me an easy answer. When I was done, I half expected him to say something like, "You're overthinking it or you have nothing to worry about," because that's what most people do. But he didn't. Instead, he asked me why I felt that way, like, really wanted to understand it, not just make it go away. I told him how I grew up, how food was never just food in my house but something you had to finish. How I was taught that leaving food on my plate was a waste, and wasting anything was bad. How those habits followed me into adulthood and turned into something I couldn't control. I told him about the bullying, the years of being the fat kid with glasses, and how even though I'm not that kid anymore, I still carry that same feeling everywhere I go. I admitted how much I hate the thought of him bringing me home to a place where people are effortlessly thin, active, and stylish, and I'm just me. He let out this long sigh and pulled me into him, holding me so tightly that for a second I thought maybe, just maybe, I could believe everything was going to be okay. He told me that he loves me for who I am, not for what I look like, not for how much I weigh. And I believe him, I do, but I also know that love doesn't change how people see me. Love won't stop the way his family might side-eye me, or the way strangers might assume things about me before I even open my mouth. I told him that I was scared of embarrassing him, that his family would see me and think he could do better. That they'd look at me and wonder why this is who he chose. He shook his head and said, "You are exactly who I want," like it was the simplest thing in the world. And maybe it is for him, but it's not for me. Because in my head, I'm still fighting a battle I thought I left behind years ago. We sat in silence for a while after that, and he finally said, "You don't have to go if you're not ready." And for a moment, I felt relieved. Like I could breathe again. But then he added, "But I think you should." Not in a pushy way, not to guilt me into it, but because he truly believes that his family will love me. He told me that his mom has been dying to meet me, that his sister keeps asking about me, that his dad already respects me for putting up with his nonsense, his words, not mine. I laughed, but deep down, I wasn't convinced. It's easy to say they'll love me when they haven't met me yet. It's easy to imagine things going well when I haven't even stepped foot on that plane. But then he said something that stuck with me. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone." And I sat there, staring at him, because that is exactly what I have spent my whole life doing. Trying to prove I'm good enough, smart enough, funny enough, worthy enough. Trying to overcompensate for the way I look by being extra kind, extra helpful, extra everything. And hearing him say that, hearing him tell me that I don't have to perform for his family, it hit me harder than I expected. He told me we could take it one step at a time, that we could plan things in a way that makes me comfortable. We could get a seat with extra space on the plane, take breaks when walking around his hometown, and even have a getaway plan if I felt overwhelmed. He made it sound so simple, so manageable, but it's my brain that makes everything so complicated. I told him I needed time to think about it, and he just kissed my forehead and said, "Take all the time you need." And that should have been comforting, but instead, it just made my anxiety spiral even more. Because now, I feel like I'm stuck between two choices that both scare me. If I go, I risk feeling like a complete outsider, struggling to fit into a world I don't belong in. If I don't go, I risk him thinking I'm not committed enough, that I don't care enough to face my fears. And what if his family really does judge me? What if they're polite to my face but secretly think I'm not good enough? What if they start questioning if I'm holding him back? I've spent the past few days overthinking everything, scrolling through forums, reading horror stories about meeting in-laws, and convincing myself that I'm making the biggest mistake of my life by even considering this trip. But then I remember how excited he was when he first asked me to go with him, how much he wants me to be part of his world, and I feel guilty for hesitating. I know I can't lose 80 pounds overnight. I know I can't magically change the way I look before Christmas, but a tiny part of me wonders if maybe, just maybe, I don't have to. Maybe I just have to show up and let them see me. Not the version I wish I could be, not the version I think they want me to be, just me. But how do you unlearn years of feeling like you're never enough? I haven't made a decision yet. I've been avoiding the topic, burying myself in distractions, but I know I have to figure it out soon. Christmas is getting closer, and so is the moment where I'll have to say yes or no. And honestly, I don't know which one scares me more. Update 2. I finally made a decision. I'm going. It wasn't an easy choice, and I went back and forth a million times. But after a lot of thinking, crying, and some deep late-night talks with my boyfriend, I realized that if I keep letting fear control my life, I'll never do anything. And honestly, I'm tired of missing out because of my own insecurities. So, I told him, I was nervous when I said it, like I was waiting for some kind of final judgment, but he just smiled and said, "I'm really proud of you." And then I almost cried again because how is he this perfect? He's been nothing but supportive the entire time, never pushing me, never making me feel like I had to go. Just letting me figure things out at my own pace. Now that the decision is made, though, the anxiety hasn't magically disappeared. In fact, it's probably worse. The reality of it is sinking in, and I've been spiraling with all the what-ifs again. What if the plane seats are too small and I have to deal with the embarrassment of asking for a seatbelt extender? What if his family really does think I'm not good enough? What if I ruin Christmas by just existing? But I'm trying. I really am. My boyfriend has been helping me with practical stuff, which actually makes me feel a little better. We booked flights, and he made sure I had an aisle seat so I wouldn't feel cramped. He even looked up the airline seat dimensions for me, which, okay, was both sweet and slightly humiliating at the same time. He said he wanted to make sure we're comfortable, and I appreciate it, but God, sometimes it's hard to accept help when it feels like it's highlighting my biggest insecurities. Then there's the packing situation. I spent an entire afternoon going through my closet, trying to figure out what I could bring that wouldn't make me feel like a walking potato next to his effortlessly stylish European family. I swear, I must have tried on every sweater I own at least 3 times. My usual strategy is to wear black because it's slimming, but I don't want to look like I'm dressed for a funeral while everyone else is in festive reds and greens. My boyfriend, of course, thinks I'm overthinking everything. He told me to wear whatever makes me comfortable and that his family won't care, but I care. And don't even get me started on the whole food situation. I've been so stressed about the idea of eating in front of his family. It sounds ridiculous, but it's something that genuinely terrifies me. What if they notice how much I eat? What if I say no to something and they think I'm being rude? What if they do the whole "oh, just have a little more" thing, and I feel pressured into eating when I'm already self-conscious? My boyfriend reassured me that his family is super chill about food, but my brain refuses to listen. In the middle of all this, I talked to my best friend, and she basically told me I'm being too hard on myself. She reminded me that I'm a good person, that I make my boyfriend happy, and that his family will see that. I wish I could believe it as easily as she does. On a more positive note, I've been doing little things to help myself feel better before the trip. I started taking walks again, not for weight loss or anything, just to clear my mind and get some movement in. It actually helps, and for a few minutes, I can convince myself that I'm strong enough to handle this. I even got a new haircut, nothing drastic, just a little trim to make me feel fresh and put together. Small victories, right? The closer we get to the trip, the more I realize that this isn't just about meeting his family. It's about proving to myself that I can do things outside of my comfort zone. That I don't have to let my insecurities keep me from experiencing life. But that's easier said than done. I keep having these moments where I feel okay, like I can actually do this, and then 5 minutes later, I'm panicking about things I can't control. It's exhausting, honestly. My boyfriend has been really patient, but I know he's excited about the trip, and I don't want to ruin it for him by being a ball of stress the entire time. I guess I just have to take it one step at a time. Get on the plane, meet his family, survive the holidays, and maybe, just maybe, I'll come out of it feeling stronger. Or at least not completely mortified. Anyway, that's where I'm at. Trying to stay positive, but also low-key terrified. Fingers crossed I don't chicken out last minute. Update 3. I did it. I went. And honestly, it wasn't anything like I expected. Leading up to the trip, I was a nervous wreck. I packed, unpacked, repacked, and spent way too much time Googling how to survive meeting your boyfriend's family without embarrassing yourself. I was fully prepared for disaster, but somehow, it never came. The flight was the first hurdle, and I won't lie, it was tough. Sitting there, waiting for the seatbelt check, I could feel my heart racing. When the flight attendant walked down the aisle, I was bracing for that awkward moment where I'd have to ask for a seatbelt extender, but I didn't need one. It fit. Barely, but it fit. And in that moment, I felt this weird surge of relief, like maybe things weren't going to be as bad as I imagined. My boyfriend was an absolute rock star throughout the entire trip. He held my hand when I needed it, distracted me with jokes, and never once made me feel like I was some kind of burden. I don't know how I got so lucky with him. Then came the big moment, meeting his family. We arrived at his parents' house, and I was ready for the worst. I thought they'd take one look at me and think, this is who our son is dating. But instead, they hugged me. Like, actual warm, genuine hugs. His mom even told me she was so happy to finally meet the girl who makes him so happy. And you know what? They were nothing like I had built up in my head. They weren't judging my every move, they weren't analyzing what I was eating, and they definitely weren't secretly wishing he was with someone else. They were just kind. His mom was this sweet, chatty woman who made me feel at home almost instantly, and his dad cracked these terrible dad jokes that reminded me so much of my own family. His sister and I even bonded over our mutual love for baking, and she insisted we bake something together before I left. Were there awkward moments? Absolutely. I caught myself overthinking things constantly. I worried about how much food I was putting on my plate, how I looked sitting on their couch, how I'd be perceived when we went out in public. But every time I started spiraling, my boyfriend would give me this little reassuring squeeze, like he knew exactly what was going on in my head. And somehow, that was enough to ground me. One thing that surprised me the most was how normal everything felt. I kept expecting to feel like an outsider, but instead, it felt like I had been there before. We went to Christmas markets, and no one stared at me. We went out to dinner with his extended family, and they asked me about my life, my hobbies, my job, not about my weight or how much I was eating. No one made me feel less than. And sure, I had a few moments of insecurity. I won't pretend that I was magically cured of all my self-doubt. But what I realized was that so much of my fear came from me. I was so convinced that people would judge me that I forgot to just exist and enjoy the experience. By the time New Year's rolled around, I actually started to relax. I laughed more, let myself enjoy the food without guilt, and even danced with his sister at their family party. I'm pretty sure I looked ridiculous, but for once, I didn't care. Before we left, his mom pulled me aside and told me that she could see how much I cared about him, and that she hoped I knew how much he cared about me too. And that meant more to me than I can even explain. Now that I'm back home, it feels almost surreal. I spent so much time dreading this trip, convinced that it would be a disaster, and instead, it turned into something that I'll genuinely cherish forever. It wasn't perfect, but it was good. So, what did I learn from all of this? People aren't always as judgmental as I make them out to be in my head. Most of the time, they're just people, living their lives, and I'm not the center of their thoughts the way I think I am. My boyfriend's family loves him, and by extension, they were open to loving me too. I just had to let them. I'm stronger than I thought. I pushed through my fears and came out on the other side, and I'm really, really proud of that. If I could go back and tell my past self anything, it would be this: stop letting fear make your decisions. Stop assuming the worst before you've even given yourself a chance to experience something. And most importantly, give yourself grace. I'm not saying I'm suddenly overflowing with confidence, but I've taken a step in the right direction. And that's something, right? Thanks for sticking with me through all of this. If you're reading this and you've ever felt the same way, scared, insecure, convinced that you're not good enough, just know that you are. And you don't have to change yourself to be worthy of love or new experiences. You're already enough.